I'm letting tall trees rest for for a little while. I'm just letting that paint dry. And in the meantime, I thought I'm going to try an experiment here in the studio. I want to start making my own boards, and I like Arches watercolor paper. It's just all 100% cotton paper, and well, I thought I'd just try this out. I managed to get one of these 9x12 pads of Arches cold press. Nice stuff. This is 100% cotton paper, and it takes washes very well. So, and in the past, I have used Canson. This is their watercolor XL line watercolor. And it's a wood pulp paper, and it's okay for mixed media type of stuff, but it's not spectacular at taking washes, not in the same way that the Arches is. So I want to try this. If I'm going to try making a board of my own, I'm going to try using some good stuff. So I got my, not that Canson's bad, I've used it for years, but I like Arches watercolor paper. So this is a cold press paper, just a sheet of it, and I'm going to soak it. I got 2 boards ready. I'm preparing to make. I'm going to soak this paper for a little bit until it gets fully saturated and stretched, expanded. All the wood, all the paper, all these cotton fibers will expand, and the paper will stretch and get a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to apply some. Well, I got some Liquitex gloss medium varnish. I'll use that like a glue for this procedure, and I got a brayer. And that's just going to help to flatten the paper down on the paper on this wooden board that I have procured. This is nothing more than what Artist Loft Economy Art Supply board from Michaels. It's their in-store brand, I believe. This is a 9x12, and this is my paper, roughly 9x12, a little bit bigger, so that's going to be nice. So it'll be just a little bit bigger than the wooden board. And I'm going to see how this goes. We'll just give it a shot. I've seen plenty of artists who like to make their own surfaces. They'll get hardboard, MDF, and they'll slap down maybe a quality drawing paper or even just a printout of an underdrawing for their big canvas painting. But in this instance, I want to try out making my own really nice quality boards. So let's give it a shot. Right, so I went over to Home Depot, and I picked up a big old mortar mixing trough. And this is a big old flat plastic bucket with a nice flat bottom to it, nice and broad, and big enough for me to soak even reasonable sized sheets of watercolor paper. In this case, 2 little sheets of 9x12 watercolor paper. So I'm going to let this soak for quite a while until this paper is fully absorbed and is fully saturated. This paper is nicely sized, and I don't want to ruin that. Of course, I don't want to ruin this paper, but I do want to have a nice soaked paper. I'm going to leave that to soak for a while. This is the way we used to do it in college. We would soak paper for quite a while, a good long while. I want this paper nice and saturated. The cotton fibers will expand, and then as it dries, when I start laying down my gloss medium, which I'm going to be using as my glue, then I just slap this on top, and I use the brayer to squeegee out any excess adhesive, and then I'm going to press it to dry and let that go. We'll just leave that for now. Alright, so while my paper is soaking in the trough, this may not be strictly necessary, but I think I'm going to just give a little bit of a pass of sandpaper just to see if I can give a little bit more tooth to the surface of this board. It's got some grain to it, but I think I just want to try a little bit of extra texture. This will give the adhesive something more to grab onto. I gave it a little bit of a dusting, and now I'm going to just use a little bit of water and paper towel just to see if I can make sure I haven't left any too much, sawdust and what have you, sanding dust on the surface. That might make things hard to glue together. I want to keep this nice and clean, and that will just take a few minutes just to dry. Okay. This seems to be dry, and I've made sure it's nice and clean. Now, my watercolor paper, it's a 9x12 sheet of 140 pound. Experts say roughly 8 minutes should be adequate for soaking. But while that's continuing, I'll let that soak for just a couple of seconds more whilst I do this. So I've got an El Cheapo Grande chip brush, I guess you might call this. I'm going to slap down a coat of this inexpensive Liquitex medium and varnish. Some people use PVC glue, and I suppose I could try that in a future experiment. I'm used to this material. I've used this for quite a lot. It's a medium and varnish, so it can be used in my acrylic paintings. You've also saw there's another video being produced that shows my taking this material and using it to varnish my watercolor painting before I start working on top and oil paint. So let's get another coat. Let's get a coat of that on this next board too. Coat. We worked kind of quickly because I want to get this ready to go. You don't want this to dry before you've applied your paper to it. And I can bray it and flat and make sure it's nice and clean, laid flat and clean. Okay, well, we got a nice coating of this material. Okay, now we got our sheet of watercolor paper. Let that drip for a moment. Get some of the extra water off the board, off the paper. I'm going to drape this over the top. I definitely want to try to center this on my board. Plenty of overhang. It was ideal. Take the second sheet. Now I think I can slow down a little bit because now the paper is soaked. It'll also keep the glue from drying too quickly on me. I'll get some of this excess glue off the edges. Okay. I'll lay that flat on top of my nice bit of board there. It's worth doing right the first time. Now, working from the center, I'm going to squeegee out gently any excess glue. See, I've got some paper towel here. Some of that excess medium is going to end up on my brayer. This is the first time I've ever done this, so it'll be interesting. This is an interesting experiment. Hopefully this works out the way I'm planning it to. But one can never know, right? Until one's tried. This may be a colossal fail. You never know. But I'll give it a shot. Careful of squeeging just one direction going outwards. Now this is going to be a nice watercolor paper that I'm attempting to lay down here, and you can see how some of that extra glue is squeeging out from underneath. And I don't want to drag that back over the surface of my paper if I can avoid it. Well, it's still wet. I think I can try to wick it away, because I really don't want to have that medium on my watercolor paper if I can avoid it. I'd kind of like to see if I can render this a nice surface for watercolor painting in addition to oils. I'll make sure I don't have any bubbles. Well, the reason I'm being so careful with the brayer, and I'd like to make certain that the brayer is not covered in acrylic medium, is I don't want the acrylic medium to seal the surface of my watercolor paper. So anything I can do to forestall that, keep that from happening, is worth doing, because I want to preserve the watercolor quality of the paper. The absorbent nature of watercolor paper. Now, of course, if there are certain areas that don't take watercolor the way I initially would intend it, that's okay, because these are ultimately meant for a mixed media preparation where I'll be working in oils over the top. That's why I want to have that nice rigid board underneath my watercolor paper. I'm effectively trying to turn this into a mixed media type of a board. And now I'm just going to let that, we're just going to let that go for a while. I'm going to make sure my edges and my corners are down. Okay, good. Okay, so got that going. I think what's going to happen next is I'm going to, I want this to dry flat. And the way I'd like to make sure that happens is I'm going to place a spare board right over the top of these. I'll probably lay something over the top of that so it's paper. Just a piece of watercolor, not watercolor paper, but drawing, some Bristol paper I'm going to use to shield the surface of my watercolor paper as I press dry. I want to make sure this stuff dries nice and flat. One way to do that, of course, is to take that. I'll slap another board on top. And of course we need some weight. And what better thing to weigh down and give myself some nice press is to, of course, a little Spectrum Annual. I love these books. And some other great books that one can add to their collection, even if not to read and learn from it, certainly just to press down the paper you're making. Another beautiful book worthy of any artist's collection, Color and Light by James Gurney. Animal Anatomy for Artists by Elliot Goldfinger. Ooh, nice, very nice. One of my favorite illustrators, J.C. Leyendecker, of course. He would make a great addition to the weight on this. One of my favorite living illustrators, of course, Mr. Todd Lockwood. This is his book Transitions. I highly recommend it. A worthy read. That's probably enough weight, although I think maybe just one more. I think this unintentionally hilarious painting of a unicorn samurai for Legend of the Five Rings that I did back in the day. This is one of those unironically funny type of assignments that you get. They end up doing this sort of a purplish pink samurai riding a horse who's made to look like a unicorn. The Unicorn Clan, of course. I'll leave that there for you guys. Yeah, well, we're just going to let that dry and press. Alright. Thank you for stopping in today, and we'll see what these look like at the end after just some drying time. Alright, well, I've removed the books and my little flattening device, aka known as a piece of hardboard. And I've pried these little fellows. They're just ever so slightly tacked at the corner, at the edges, where the gloss medium had kind of oozed over the sides a little bit, but then no damage done. And here we have a rather solid looking board. You can see it's nicely adhered to this piece of panel. And right now it's ever so slightly damp, but the paper is still drying. There's still a little bit of residual moisture, but nothing that I think is going to do any damage. This paper is nicely glued to these boards. And I cannot wait to see what it's like to paint watercolor on top of these. And once I have that all completed, yeah. So far so good. The next stage will be to try a little test piece on see how this thing takes wash after it's been mounted to board, huh? Alright, I'll be back shortly with the next segment. Okay, well, I've let this dry overnight, and it is solidly glued to this board. This looks like my approach has proven successful so far. And I think what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my really manly looking shop knife. This is just a husky box knife, you know, replaceable blades. I'm just going to slice off this excess material. And I'm just going to clean that up. And the edge of the board gives us a nice handy, don't need much pressure, gives a nice handy edge. There you go. Now that's been pretty much nice. That seems to be flush cut, and that's a nice edge. All right, well, I'll continue to cut this down and make it look pretty, and then I'm going to give these a test drive. Give this new board a test drive. See how it takes watercolor still.